The rain was falling hard that night, turning the streets of New York City into rivers of reflected light. Emily sat alone in a quiet cafe, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Across from her sat Ryan, the man who had once made her believe in forever. Now, there was only silence between them, heavy, sharp, and full of things neither of them dared to say. Their eyes met, and for a second it felt like old times. But the warmth had faded. Love was still there, somewhere deep. But it had grown tired from too many late arguments, too many promises left hanging. Ryan took a breath and looked down. "I think we've both changed," he said, his voice almost lost beneath the hum of rain and distant traffic. Emily blinked back tears she refused to let fall. Change, that word felt so small compared to what they had lost. She wanted to fight to tell him they could fix this, but the truth sat quietly inside her. Maybe this was the end. Love didn't always survive everything. Sometimes it ran out of breath. For a long moment, neither moved. The world outside kept going, taxis rushing by, strangers laughing under umbrellas as if their small heartbreak didn't matter at all. Emily's throat ached as she whispered, "So this is it." Ryan's jaw tightened. He looked at her like someone memorizing a face he didn't want to forget. "I'll always care about you," he said, his tone soft but final. Emily managed a small nod. She didn't trust her voice anymore. When he stood up, she watched him adjust his jacket and glance at her one last time. "Take care of yourself," she murmured, the words barely reaching him. He paused in the doorway, looked back as if to say something more, then turned and walked into the rain. The door closed behind him, and just like that, her world grew quieter. Emily stayed there for a few minutes, staring at the empty chair across from her. Her heart thudded painfully, like it was trying to chase after him. She wanted to run outside, call his name, make him stay. But she didn't. Instead, she picked up her phone, scrolled through their old photos one last time, then deleted his number. It felt like cutting off a piece of her own heart. When she stepped out of the cafe, the rain soaked through her coat, but she didn't care. The city lights blurred in her tears. Every building, every street seemed to whisper his name. They had shared this city, its laughter, its music, its quiet corners, and now it all belonged to memory. She walked home alone, the sound of her footsteps mixing with the rhythm of the storm. Her apartment felt empty when she arrived. The couch still had the blanket they used to share on movie nights. The kitchen still smelled faintly of his favorite coffee. She stood there for a while, unsure what to do. The silence was so deep it almost felt alive. She finally sank onto the couch, hugged a pillow, and let the tears come. It wasn't the kind of crying that felt dramatic or loud. It was quiet, tired tears, the kind that came when the heart finally understood something the mind had been avoiding. Emily wasn't just crying for Ryan, she was crying for everything they had been. The laughter, the late-night talks, the plans that would never happen now. She was crying for the girl she used to be, the one who believed love could fix anything. The next few days passed in a blur. She went to work, smiled at her coworkers, answered emails, and pretended she was fine. But every night, when she got home, the mask slipped. She would sit by her window, staring at the city lights, wondering where Ryan was. Was he thinking about her too? Or had he already moved on? She tried not to wonder, but the thoughts came anyway, uninvited and painful. Her friends noticed something was off, of course. They invited her out, tried to cheer her up, told her that time heals everything. Emily nodded and smiled, but she didn't believe it yet. Healing felt impossible when everything still reminded her of him. His laughter echoed in her mind. His jacket still hung at the back of her closet. The playlist they made together still played on shuffle when she forgot to skip a song. One evening, about a week after the breakup, Emily found herself standing on the Brooklyn Bridge. It was their spot, the place they used to come to when life got messy. The wind was cold, but the city looked beautiful. She leaned against the railing and watched the skyline, its lights twinkling like distant stars. For a moment she closed her eyes and imagined him beside her again, his arm around her, his warmth steady against the wind. But when she opened her eyes, he was gone, and all that remained was the sound of traffic below. That night, as she walked home, she realized something small but important. Even though Ryan was gone, the world hadn't ended. The streets still glowed, the air still smelled like rain, and the city was still alive. Maybe, she thought, her heart could learn to live again too. It wouldn't be easy. It would take time. But perhaps there was life waiting on the other side of heartbreak. She reached her apartment and stood by the window, watching the city's endless rhythm. Somewhere out there, Ryan was living his life, and she was here, trying to start hers again. She didn't hate him. She couldn't. He had been her best friend, her love, her home, until he wasn't. Emily took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "You'll be okay." It was a fragile promise, but it was something. She turned off her phone, made herself tea, and sat quietly, letting the warmth fill the empty spaces. As the night deepened, she found herself thinking about how strange love could be, how it could lift you higher than anything else, and then leave you learning how to stand again. She knew she wouldn't forget Ryan. Some people aren't meant to be forgotten. They become part of your story, even if their chapter ends. Before going to bed, Emily opened her journal and wrote one simple line. Maybe healing starts when you stop waiting for someone to come back. Then she closed the book, turned off the light, and let the city's hum lull her to sleep. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady. It felt like the world was washing away the old, making room for something new. Emily didn't know it yet. But this ending was only the beginning, the start of her healing, and perhaps the quiet path that would one day lead her back to love. Months passed since that rainy night in New York. Emily tried to rebuild her life, piece by piece. Work kept her busy, her graphic design projects demanding her focus. And she threw herself into creating something that belonged only to her. She went out with friends, attended small gatherings, and even started joining yoga classes to calm her restless mind. Yet, despite all the distractions, her thoughts often drifted back to Ryan. She missed the comfort of his presence. It's the way he laughed at her smallest jokes, the way their conversations flowed effortlessly. Sometimes it hit her suddenly a song on the radio. A street they had walked together, a coffee mug left behind, and she felt the old ache, sharp and familiar. She told herself she was moving on, but the truth was, her heart refused to let him go. One crisp autumn afternoon, while Emily was scrolling through LinkedIn between tasks, she noticed something that made her stomach flip. "Ryan Parker has viewed your profile." Her hand froze mid-scroll and she blinked at the screen. It had been months since they spoke, months of quiet healing and careful forgetting. And now he was here in her digital world. She didn't reply. The thought of sending a message, of reopening wounds that had barely begun to close, terrified her. Yet a small spark of curiosity flickered inside her. A question she couldn't voice. Why now? She tried to push the thought away, throwing herself into her work, but the universe had other plans. A week later, Emily's office invited her to a design conference in Boston. She packed her bags with professional excitement, but also a quiet nervousness she couldn't explain. Arriving in the city, the energy was different. Crisp autumn air, golden leaves on the streets, and a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in months. On the first morning, as she turned toward the registration desk, she froze. Ryan was there, standing tall, holding a coffee cup, scanning the crowd, and then their eyes met. Her heart leaped and then sank. This wasn't a message on a screen or a fleeting thought in the night. This was real. He was real, and he was standing in front of her. The world seemed to pause. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. Memories flooded back, their late-night walks, the inside jokes, the quiet Sunday mornings spent together. She saw him not just as the man she had loved, but as someone who had changed as much as she had. Ryan's voice broke the silence. "Emily." It was soft, uncertain, and full of the same hesitation she felt. She managed a small smile, feeling both warmth and pain at the sight of him. "Hey, Ryan, long time." The words felt heavy, yet light at the same time, carrying months of unsaid emotions. They stood there awkwardly for a moment, strangers and yet intimately familiar. The first day of the conference was a blur. Emily tried to focus on the presentations and the networking, but Ryan was always in the periphery of her mind. And sometimes, unexpectedly, he was right in front of her, sharing a laugh over a conference schedule, asking her opinion on a presentation, or simply catching her gaze from across the room. It felt like the universe was nudging them together, reminding them of the connection they once had. But both of them were cautious. The wounds were still fresh, the memories still raw. That evening, Emily found herself in the hotel lobby, pretending to read a brochure while waiting for the elevator. She felt his presence before she saw him. Ryan approached slowly, a gentle smile on his face, and said, "Do you want to grab dinner?" Just to catch up. Her heart raced, and for a moment she thought of all the reasons to say no. The heartbreak, the distance, the fear of reopening old scars. But something in her whispered yes. "Sure," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Dinner was a quiet affair at first, filled with polite conversation and careful smiles. But soon the old rhythm returned. They laughed over small memories, shared stories of the months apart, and spoke about their work and dreams. The conversation flowed easily, the way it always had when they were together. Emily noticed the subtle changes in him, his voice deeper, his expressions calmer, his eyes still carrying the familiar warmth she loved. Ryan noticed her too, seeing both the strength she had gained and the traces of the pain she carried. After dinner, they walked through Boston's quiet streets. The city was lit softly by street lamps, and the leaves crunched beneath their feet. Neither of them spoke for long stretches, but the silence was comfortable, not empty. Emily realized that she had missed this, the simple companionship, the presence of someone who knew her completely. Ryan reached for her hand as they crossed a small bridge, and she didn't pull away. It was a cautious touch, testing boundaries, but it sent a thrill through her that she hadn't felt in months. Back at their hotel, they parted for the night with a quiet promise to meet again the next day. Emily lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Seeing him again had stirred a mix of emotions, hope, fear, longing, and the realization that their story wasn't over. She couldn't predict what would happen next, but a small part of her allowed herself to imagine the possibility of them finding each other again. Not as they were, but as the people they had become. As she drifted to sleep, Emily thought about how strange and unpredictable life could be. One day, someone you loved walks out of your life, and months later, the universe finds a way to bring them back. She didn't know if this encounter would heal the old wounds or reopen them. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in a long time. There was a spark of hope, fragile yet persistent, that whispered, maybe, just maybe, they weren't done yet. The next day of the conference, Emily and Ryan found themselves together more often than by chance. Workshops, lunch breaks, even casual chats by the hotel lounge brought them closer. They discovered that time apart hadn't erased their connection. It had changed them, shaped them, and perhaps prepared them to understand each other in ways they hadn't before. Conversations touched on old memories, but also new dreams, ambitions, and fears. Every laugh, every glance reminded them that the bond they had shared was still alive. Quiet but persistent, like embers waiting to ignite. Emily realized that the past didn't have to define them, but it could guide them. They could acknowledge their heartbreak, their mistakes, their pain, without letting it control what came next. Ryan seemed to feel the same. His apologies were quiet but genuine. His words weren't about blame, but understanding. For the first time in months, Emily felt the weight on her chest lift, replaced with cautious optimism. That night, as they walked through the hotel corridor, Ryan glanced at her and said softly, "It's strange, isn't it? How life brings you back to things you thought were over." She nodded, smiling, feeling the truth of his words. They didn't know what the future held, but they were both here in this moment, choosing to be present. Emily realized that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about being brave enough to face someone who had hurt you and still find a way to be open. Seeing Ryan again didn't erase the past, but it allowed her to imagine a future where they could, maybe, rebuild something real. The night ended with a gentle promise, unspoken, but understood, that tomorrow would bring more conversations, more moments, and perhaps a chance to rewrite their story. As she lay in bed that night, Emily felt her heart stir with hope. The encounter had opened a door she had thought permanently closed. She didn't know if walking through it would be easy or even possible, but she knew she wanted to try. Somewhere in the quiet of the hotel room, surrounded by the soft hum of the city, she whispered to herself, "Maybe we aren't done yet." The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, and somewhere deep inside, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet possibility of love returning, stronger, wiser, and ready to heal the old wounds. The next day of the Boston conference began with a crisp autumn chill, and Emily felt a mix of excitement and anxiety she couldn't shake. Seeing Ryan yesterday had stirred up a whirlwind of emotions, longing, hope, fear, all tangled together. She tried to focus on the sessions, but her mind kept drifting to him. Every glance at the conference room entrance made her heart skip. She wasn't sure if this was bravery or recklessness, but she couldn't deny the pull she still felt. When she finally saw him standing with a cup of coffee and casually flipping through his notes, her stomach flipped by late morning. Their paths crossed naturally. They ended up sitting together during a workshop, sharing a quiet space in the crowded room. The conversation started cautiously. Small talk about the presentations and speakers. Yet it didn't take long before the old rhythm returned. Laughter began to break through the hesitation, soft and genuine. Emily found herself relaxing, her shoulders lowering for the first time in months. Ryan noticed her smile and felt the same warmth he had felt when they were together before. It was familiar but different, like meeting an old friend who had grown wiser, stronger, and still somehow essential to your life. After the session, they grabbed coffee in a nearby cafe. It was a quiet spot, away from the noise and crowds, with soft light streaming through tall windows. Ryan leaned forward, resting his elbow on the table, and spoke quietly. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said, almost hesitant, as if revealing a truth that scared him as much as it terrified her. Emily's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to say that she had moved on. But the truth was there in her heart, she hadn't. Every laugh, every memory, every silent moment they shared had lingered in her mind. Stubborn and alive, she finally spoke, her voice soft. "I thought you had." He shook his head gently. "I tried. I really did. But every time I thought I moved forward, something reminded me of you. Every place, every song, every little thing made me think, maybe it wasn't over." Emily looked at him, seeing both vulnerability and sincerity in his eyes. She realized he wasn't here to rekindle something recklessly. He was here to understand, to reconnect. Cautiously and with care, they spent the afternoon walking through Boston's historic streets. The leaves crunching beneath their feet, the sunlight creating a golden glow that felt almost magical. They talked about their lives' small achievements, struggles at work, dreams they hadn't shared before. It was like discovering each other anew, peeling back the layers of time apart. Emily noticed how Ryan had matured, how patience had replaced impulsiveness, and how his laugh now carried a gentle depth she had missed. Ryan noticed Emily's strength, her confidence, and the quiet wisdom in her eyes that had grown from months of learning to stand on her own. When they paused at a small park, he took her hand instinctively. She didn't pull away, though her heart raced. The simple contact sent warmth through her chest, reminding her of all the times she had longed to feel connected to him again. It was a touch without pressure, gentle and tentative, but it held a silent promise. They could explore what was possible, step by careful step. Emily realized that fear and hope could coexist, and in that delicate balance, something real might grow. By evening, they found themselves back at the hotel. Yet neither was ready to retreat to their rooms. Ryan suggested a quiet walk, and they stepped outside into the crisp night air. The city lights reflected in puddles, and the streets were almost empty. It felt intimate, like the world had shrunk to only them. Ryan spoke softly. "I know we can't erase the past, Emily, but maybe we can learn from it together." She nodded, feeling the weight of her own fears lift slightly. Perhaps love wasn't about forgetting mistakes. It was about understanding them and choosing to move forward despite them. Later, in their hotel lounge, they sat with hot chocolate in hand, watching the city outside. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with unspoken understanding. Emily realized that the spark between them hadn't died, had just dimmed, waiting for the right moment to glow again. She noticed small details she had forgotten, the way he gestured when he spoke, the warmth in his eyes, the calm way he listened. Ryan, in turn, noticed her laughter returning, her posture easing, and the way her presence felt like home, even after months apart. Over the next day of the conference, they spent more time together. They attended panels, shared meals, and laughed at little mishaps. Each moment reminded them of what they had lost and what they could still have. The connection was undeniable, and yet there was caution in every word. A shared understanding that rushing wouldn't fix anything. Emily noticed herself thinking about him constantly, imagining a life where past mistakes didn't define their future. Ryan, too, was realizing that healing and love could coexist if they allowed themselves the time and space to grow together. At lunch, Ryan reached for her hand again, a small, deliberate touch. Emily looked into his eyes and saw honesty, care, and longing reflected back. She didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed herself to feel the warmth, letting it remind her that love wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence, about returning even when it was difficult. Their conversation that day was deeper, more personal. They discussed fears, past regrets, and the things they wanted to do differently. It wasn't just about reconnecting romantically, it was about understanding each other as people who had grown and changed. That night, after the conference events, they walked slowly through Boston's quiet streets again. Ryan paused and looked at her seriously. "Emily, I don't want to fall apart again," he admitted. She felt her heart ache at his words, but also feel hope. "Then don't," she whispered back. "Let's fall into something better, something stronger." It was tentative, fragile, but it was a step forward, a choice to be brave together. Emily returned to her hotel room that night with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. Seeing Ryan again, spending time with him, and sharing honest conversations had reminded her that love wasn't just about the highs, it was about resilience, trust, and the willingness to try again. She realized that the past didn't have to haunt her future. It could guide her, teach her, and shape her into someone capable of love that was patient, intentional, and strong. As she lay in bed, she thought about the strange timing of life. One day, someone you thought was gone forever could reappear, changing everything with just a glance, a conversation, or a shared smile. The universe, it seemed, had a way of testing hearts, of asking people to face their past, to understand what they truly wanted. Emily closed her eyes, letting the memories of the last 2 days settle in. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this. She wanted to explore it, to see where honesty, patience, and careful steps could lead. The night deepened, and the city outside glowed softly. Emily felt hope stirring again, quiet but persistent. It wasn't certainty, but it was enough to keep her heart open. Ryan's presence had reminded her that love could be reborn. Not as a repeat of the past, but as something stronger, wiser, and more meaningful. She whispered to herself, "Maybe this time we can get it right." And somewhere in the quiet of the hotel room, she felt the possibility of a future that included both healing and love. A future they could write together carefully. Step by step, months had passed since the Boston conference, and Emily's life had changed in quiet, meaningful ways. She had returned to New York, focusing on her work, her friendships, Kay, and her own growth. But Ryan had never left her thoughts. After the conference, they had stayed in touch cautiously at first, sharing messages and occasional phone calls. Each conversation was careful, honest, and intentional. Neither rushed. Neither forced anything. They both knew that rebuilding trust and connection took time. Yet, with each interaction, the old warmth returned, not as a memory, but as something alive, something ready to grow again. One evening, Ryan suggested meeting at the same cafe where their last goodbye had occurred. Emily felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation as she walked through the familiar streets. The cafe hadn't changed. The rain-scented air, the hum of conversation, and the clink of cups made the space feel like a bridge between past and present. She arrived first, choosing a table near the window, and let herself remember the moments she had spent here with him before. The memories were bittersweet, but instead of aching, they now carried a sense of hope. Ryan arrived a few minutes later, holding a coffee cup, smiling softly. His presence felt different now, steadier, calmer, and full of quiet confidence. "Hey, Emily," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "It's good to see you." Her heart fluttered at this simple greeting. "You too," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt. There was no rush, no expectation, just the presence of two people willing to try again, willing to explore what could come from patience and honesty. They talked about their months apart, the changes they had undergone, and the lessons they had learned. Emily shared how she had started to prioritize herself, her work, and her well-being, while Ryan spoke about his reflections, his efforts to grow and understand himself better. The conversation flowed naturally, free from judgment, free from the shadows of the past. It was easy, comfortable, and filled with subtle moments of connection, the way their eyes met, the small smiles, the shared laughter over trivial memories. As they spoke, Emily noticed how the old sparks had not vanished. They were there, quiet but undeniable, a reminder of the bond they had once shared and the potential of what they could now create. Ryan reached across the table, brushing her hand gently with his fingers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she felt the warmth of his touch. It's a soft reassurance that the connection they were rebuilding was real, intentional, and mutual. It wasn't about rushing back into romance, but about acknowledging the trust and understanding they had nurtured over months of careful effort. After leaving the cafe, they walked through the streets together. The city lights shimmered above them, reflecting off the wet pavement from a recent rain. Their conversation shifted from past reflections to future possibilities. Ryan spoke of his hopes, his career ambitions, and the dreams he had set aside before. Emily shared her own aspirations, revealing vulnerabilities she hadn't allowed herself to express before. With each step, each word, the distance between them, once filled with heartbreak and fear, seemed to dissolve. They were not the same people they had been months ago. They were stronger, wiser, and more prepared to nurture a relationship built on trust and patience. Emily realized that love wasn't about perfection or flawless timing. It was about resilience, about returning after mistakes, about acknowledging past hurt and choosing to move forward consciously. Ryan felt the same way. He had learned that affection required effort, patience, and attentiveness, and that love could flourish when given space and honesty. They had both matured, and now the foundation of their renewed connection rested on understanding, care, and shared commitment. Over the following weeks, they continued to see each other, slowly building routines and habits that allowed their relationship to deepen naturally. They went for walks in Central Park, enjoyed quiet dinners, even attended art exhibits together, laughing at the small mishaps that made each day memorable. Their interactions were full of subtle tenderness, holding hands during a street crossing, sharing a scarf on a windy evening, or pausing in a bookstore to discuss a novel they both loved. Every moment reinforced the idea that love could be patient, deliberate, and beautiful. One night, as snow began to fall gently over the city, Emily and Ryan returned to the cafe once more. The world outside was white and soft, and inside they sat together, warm and comfortable. Ryan reached for her hand and held it firmly, looking into her eyes with quiet intensity. "Emily," he said softly, "I never want to lose what we found again." Her chest tightened with emotion. She knew he meant it, that this wasn't just nostalgia or fleeting desire. It was the result of time, reflection, and the conscious choice to be together. Emily squeezed his hand gently. "Neither do I," she whispered. "We've both grown, and now we know what we want." There was a sense of finality in their words. Not in the end of something way, but in the acknowledgement that they had learned from the past and were ready to move forward. The snow continued to fall, covering the city in white, creating a sense of quiet magic around them. They sat for a while, talking and laughing, savoring the simple presence of each other. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Ryan's relationship blossomed into something stable, mature, and deeply fulfilling. They learned to communicate openly, handle disagreements with understanding, and support each other's individual goals. They celebrated small victories and comforted each other during setbacks. The love between them was no longer impulsive or fragile. It was steady, resilient, and based on mutual respect and shared growth.